So I will now welcome Professor Remy Quirion to introduce and lead the final panel, Inclusive Policies for Diverse Contexts. A round of applause for Professor Quirion, please.
So here we are, the last session of a very busy meeting. Two things before I invite the member of the panel to join me on the stage. Something a bit strange, but I want to mention that to you. Some of you may have received an email from me saying that I was dying somewhere in the middle of a forest or stuck somewhere. That's not a real email. I'm still a bit tired, but surviving. And if you want to donate money, because they usually ask for money in those things, well, don't donate money to me, donate money to INGSA. That would be a great gesture. So don't respond to the email, because then your name will be in some kind of algorithm, and you'll receive many more requests of that kind. At the end, we'll have a group photo. So after the closing remark, then we'll have a group photo just here in this room. So you're all welcome, of course, to join us here on the stage. So the speaker, the panelists in that last session, like to invite Lise. Don't know. Lise, Didas, Jeff, Sonja, and Cheyenne. Bonjour, bonjour. So you just... So thank you very much. You see the affiliation of the member of the panel on the screen, so I will not go through that. Colleague in the office work on some kind of a script. I'm not very good to follow script, so basically I turn it around. And as Jeremy said this morning, when everything seemed to be scripted, we rapidly realized that it is scripted. So we'll start almost my first question to each and every one of you. We'll start almost by the end. What will be your take-home message from this meeting? So maybe you can start with Lise.
The power of knowledge, the importance of sharing, and inclusiveness, making sure that we all work together towards a common goal with a vision of solving the global challenges.
Great. Didas.
Thank you, Remy. Mine would be basically two things. One is coordination of whatever is being done by so many of the scientists in the country, in the region, and around the world. And two is collaboration, coordination and collaboration. Thank you.
Jeff.
This is my first time at an INGSA, and I think the paradox is that in the age of Zoom and Teams and Skype, it's still really important to be with other people in a place, talking. And I'm more and more struck that the interface of science and policy and politics is also very relational. It's actually very conversational. You can do brilliant reports and living repositories, but actually knowledge is still only really absorbed when you've talked about it with people, and when rather than arrogantly thinking that you're smarter than them, you empathize with their lives and their needs, rather than thinking because you're in a university you have the answers to everything. And many people have confirmed that.
Sharon, and maybe I will just mention here before you start, Sharon, that maybe you know, but just to remind you that she's now the incoming president or director of the African chapter.
Thank you.
Sharon.
So my takeaway, I would say, is that the common vision that we have, the want and the need to collaborate and to work together, and then putting the human at the center of all our activities and at the center of science advice.
Great.
Yeah, it's
Sonja.
also my first time attending an INGSA conference, and coming from a research funding organization, I'd like to comment from this point of view. And my take-home message personally and to our organization and to research funders in general, I would say that the really way we assess the quality of research, the way that we really broaden the scope of contributions, of scientific achievements, of individual CVs and individual background is really key for the quality and the inclusiveness of the later potential research advice based on the knowledge generated from the projects that we fund.
Very good. So maybe if we have time toward the end, we'll ask you also in the audience, or maybe you could send that electronically, take a message from each and every one of you. That will help us to develop to plan the next phase of development of INGSA. My second question to all the panelists: inclusive policy in a diverse context. Is it just jargon? What does it really mean to you? What are the key challenges related to that sentence if we want to make it actionable? So maybe I start at the opposite at this time. Start with Sonja.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. So besides, as I've said before, ensuring ex ante and ex post research quality throughout assessment, so what else can we do to really ensure inclusive policies in diverse contexts? And I think that funders really do play a key role in fostering open and inclusive research environments, that we also play a key role in safeguarding research, the freedom of research, in order really to have the full potential that can flourish within national or international research landscapes. And as you all know, there might be hurdles. You all have heard of the leaky pipeline. This is not only when it comes to female researchers, this also and especially holds true for persons with other diverse backgrounds and intersectional dimensions of diversity. And for research funders, it's really crucial to reduce any procedural hurdles, to constantly monitor and self-reflect what we are doing, the programs we are offering, the applicants that apply to us. Why do we lose people on this way? When we have a look also to the students and the composition of the students we have, and really to be actively engaging in diversifying the workforce. Because this workforce that's active in the national or also European or international environment is key to really have, as you've said it, inclusive policies for this diverse context we have and the global challenges we are tackling. Another task we do have is, as research funders, to really ensure inclusiveness is we can help to build or set up bodies that quality assure positions, diverse positions brought forward to certain topics, to really have a look if they are correspond to the current state of the art, to good scientific practice, if they are scientifically valid. And also what we've heard this morning is to try to reconcile or balance evidence that's brought forward from different disciplines. Because there might be evidence that's good for the solution from one discipline, but there are contradictory findings, as we've heard, for tackling COVID, and it might have be costs, I would say, maybe to society. And this is something we can set up in an impartial way with interdisciplinary and independent bodies that take care of the validation of the findings. And last but not least, we help to communicate also these findings and also to combat false information, because people have a trust if you do it properly, also in their research funding organizations. Thank you.
So the component of public trust is central, more and more central to what you're trying to do?
I would say so, because it's also taxpayers' monies that we are spending, and it's in the responsibility of the research funders made on national or whatever level to really safeguard the quality and impartialness of the findings.
Thank you. Sharon.
Yes. So when we are talking about diverse contexts, we also understand that we have a lot of common challenges and also common opportunities and similar aspiration across the different countries in the African continent. What we have found from our programs in the past is that the people, the scientists in the African continent face similar challenges. And we talk about equity. So if we want to be inclusive, we have to address the challenges that we have. We have to address some of the lack of resources. For example, I can talk about low internet penetration, but I will also talk about the man-made conflicts that we have in the continent and beyond. And if we cannot address all these, then how are we to be inclusive in our approach in what we are trying to do as science advice practitioners? And we have the lived experience of all the scientists that we meet across different countries, beyond the different borders. So we have refugees in the African continent, we have refugees across the world. So how are we to be inclusive when we have to address all these, I would say, often man-made issues, and we have to find collective solutions to that.
Okay, thank you very much. Jeff.
So I'd like to link this question to democracy. I think democracy depends on science and shared truths, and that's becoming more and more difficult now. But science itself is not and never has been very democratic. 60 years ago, I think about a third of all global R&D was funded by the US Department of Defense, which is not a very inclusive approach. It's now 3%, but the big shift, apart from to a more multipolar world, has been to business. And a relatively small number of businesses investing vast amounts in R&D, and not much engagement or accountability to the wider public. And I think this is already becoming a problem and will become more of a problem of trust for all the reasons that have been said. Now, one aspect of this is actually engaging the public in shaping the priorities of science and technology. A few countries are doing very tentative experiments. The Netherlands is a good example to involve the public, but most never even ask the public what they think should be the priorities for public spending. And in my country, a recent survey showed only 9% think publicly funded R&D benefits them, a sign of a possible problem to come. There's the whole world of citizen science and things like indigenous citizen science, which are incredibly exciting, but again, not really yet linked in to the decision-making systems. There are views that we should be involving many more people in taking part in experiments, and an emergent field of social R&D, applying the scientific method to testing out new approaches on things like elder care, early childhood. But again, they're very marginal compared to the traditional systems. So I think we have quite a big job of moving from science essentially for people to science with people, to making it more genuinely relational and essentially just applying some of the basic principles of democracy. If you don't do that, the language of inclusion will tend to be a bit of a rhetorical, cosmetic layer without all that much real substance.
So we talk a little bit about the disruptive technology here at the meeting, a lot on AI, quantum, and so on. So your comments suggest that making things worse because these huge company, they don't necessarily have to link with society?
Well, this is a big topic. I've been arguing for 10 years that we have a big problem with AI, that we haven't created the institutions to actually govern AI, to involve the public, to think through not just the ethics, but the practical winners and losers. And to me, it's amazing that even now, there's only a handful of such institutions on the planet. In China, the EU is beginning to make them, but they're 10 years late. And for quantum, we will have an even bigger problem of how to ensure that the very complex judgments about what to allow, what to ban, what to regulate are made with the engagement of the public, rather than them just as passive observers who are meant to admire the magic which comes out of the labs or the big companies.
And do you think there is an opportunity for Africa here?
I would love to see Africa leapfrog over the inertia of the rich north, yes.
Good, great. Vidas.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I would say this question that is put, inclusive policy in a diverse context, what are the challenges? I would say, one, you can answer this question in a national context. It can be answered in a regional context, but it can as well be answered, responded to in a global perspective context. But if I take, for example, from what has been said here about AI, and it reminds me what the question was in a conference we had last week in Nairobi, and I was moderating the session like this. And one of the participants asked, after the panelists presented about AI and how good it is and so many things that AI is bringing, but some of them also highlighted about the challenges that would be brought about by AI. And one of the questions from the audience was, who then controls AI? Because, yes, a lot can be done, but who controls AI? Whether from a national perspective or a regional. And the surprising answer was that nobody controls AI. I'm sure that is quite threatening. But anyway, there is AI and it is a reality. We have to live with it. Whether controlled or not, we shall have to continue with it, living with it and finding out more about AI, knowing more about AI. But coming back to the question, I think, yes, it is topical today, and so many funding agencies, so many multinationals or whoever we get as a source of finance, or sometimes even governments will talk about inclusiveness, inclusivity, equity, but I must admit that this is complex, a concept. Complex in a way that, yes, even that itself is definable from each perspective, from a different perspective, from a different context. You might find that what would be defined as inclusivity here in Rwanda, from our perspective, might not necessarily work elsewhere in any other jurisdiction. So, yes, inclusivity, but also we must admit that as we are talking about inclusivity, there are also challenges attached to that inclusivity. I'm not saying we shouldn't have it as something to be put as a principle, but also we have to admit that diversity, that diverse context is also another issue to be always taken along with inclusivity, diverse context. And I will come to those who spoke before me, talked about some examples where, like, you think if you have to work faster, responding to a certain emergency, like what happened during COVID, people thought, scientists thought, they would really work so fast in responding to an emergency, a pandemic that has broken up. I mean, and scientists were so fast, but they wanted to work, they thought they would respond to it exclusively from all others. Later on, it emerged that these pure scientists, those who are working in laboratories, if they had thought about including those from humanities, probably their response would have been even much better than it was. And we saw how people were resistant to whatever was coming up from or by these scientists in different jurisdictions. We were watching what was happening, especially from the West, but also from within the region, even to the extent of denying whether actually the pandemic is there. And that would mean that science, maybe those who are working on it in the laboratories, ought to have been closely working with those from humanities perspective to even assess how the ownership or partaking of this that will have been generated as a response to the emergency would work. So inclusivity, I agree, but of course, it goes along with so many conflicting interests, and that's what makes it more complex. If I draw it back to our context from a university or teaching perspective, it's not so long time ago that most African countries, I'm sure it started from the West, we are talking about promoting, for example, STEM education. It got promoted, and in a way it overshadowed all others. And now one wonders whether fostering STEM and leaving out other, for example, humanities, teaching humanities, would actually provide solutions to the problems, to the existing problems around. So even in the researches we've been talking about, policies, if we can simply push for one perspective, from one context, without that inclusivity, at the end of it, we will have lost it all. If we talk about the example that was given of refugees, I'm sure it is topical today, and we are seeing whatever is happening in Europe, in the UK, in Western Europe, in the US and elsewhere, refugees, yes. If, for example, UK, any country from the Central Europe or from the US, North America, would start thinking about or trying to address the issue of refugees with the exclusion of where those refugees come from, participation of those, I'm sure they will have the surface of it, but they will not get the reality of the issue, the basis, the foundation of the issues. And thereupon, at the end of it, if you have to address that refugee issue, it will be from that perspective, and probably you can improvise the solutions, the responses to that, but you have not gotten to the roots, the root causes. And so it will be a surface response, and it will be lacking the foundations. And ultimately, you have not responded to the issue. It will resurface sooner or later. So inclusivity, inclusiveness, if you have to address such an issue, I would think that really you need to have people coming together, thinking together, and responding, starting from the roots, other than really looking at it with exclusive, in the exclusion of what would be or what is actually the root causes. So I'm looking at it, and we've seen it in different sessions during this INGSA conference, that yes, we have not to ignore. If it is a community, you have to involve. For us to be providing really evidence-based responses and or guidances to policies or informing policymakers, we also have to assess it broadly, including, having it inclusive, looking at all different components of society, all, even when it is science shows us today that it is the only common language that the world can speak. So if it is the only common language, then the science should be inclusive, not only left to a certain class of people or to a certain part of the world. It must be the global language. And if it is a global language, as you address an issue from, for example, from Canada, you ought to be thinking what is happening, what would be the perspective from Rwanda, or perspective from Mauritius, or the perspective from Australia, because those are far distant areas, but at the end of it, because we speak the same language, the language of science, then we have to handle, and that's what I said earlier in my first submission, that collaboration, but also coordination in what we are responding to. Otherwise, we are duplicating, we are multiplying journal articles or findings, but they are not responding to things because we do not work inclusively together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See that he's a president of university, a vice chancellor, a professor, so he basically can talk for probably hours if he wants. Please.
Thank you very much. A lot has been said already, and I'm also mindful of the time, but I see we have enough time. So I want to highlight 3 points, but I want to start with something very basic, shoes. So, we do say one shoe does not fit all, and that's really what science is about. We need to understand that we need different pairs of shoes for different purposes. We all have more than one pair of shoes in our cupboards. And some shoes are for dancing and some for walking. And I often look at funding models and how can we transform these to ensure there's a fit for purpose for all, that we are including all the different sciences because they are addressing needs at different levels. During the last 2 days, we've heard the importance of community science and how do we take and implement and incorporate science at all levels to address not only corporate or global needs, but and society needs, but also individual needs in little communities. And that's very important, and therefore we need these different strategies. And that takes me to that transformation of frameworks, that we need to advance science equally and inclusively. And we have to ensure that the forgotten science or the smaller science, and I'm going to use soil science as an example. And I read a very interesting article around soil is not dirt. We need to take care of our soils. It all starts in the soils to feed the populations. And it's very important that we equally consider sciences in all its dimensions. And there was a brilliant presentation on Monday, and it was really about mind health and going from stars to microbes, to be able to cover the whole spectrum to address the needs of all. I want to take it to one step further into creating enabling environments for all. And we have spoken about skills, capacity building, enabling scientists to function optimally and to grow towards excellence. And I do feel that we also have certain element of blindness. We sometimes do not see the inevitable. I'm going to use an example of female scientists. And I often sit in audiences and I look at panels or I look at professors and I ask myself, the world population, more than half of the world population is female. So what happened to them? Why are we not creating that enabling environment, that vehicle to transform them and help them and enable them to become the leaders of tomorrow? And I think that should really be a priority and a focus for science funding. And that's part of that transformation journey that we all need to go through. And the last point is we also need to unpack layers of knowledge. It's interesting we've mentioned AI and the valuable tools we now have in AI. We also listened to the Elsevier presentation and the incredible tools we have to do metadata analysis, analyze science trends, and to use AI complementary to help scrub and accumulate the knowledge, the bits of knowledge that's lying all over at different levels. And that institutional knowledge is sort of that last layer of knowledge that we would like to capture. Now, I was thinking of the microchips in our minds that I think a few high-profile people are talking about and trying to develop. And I think we need to embrace the future. It's coming. We need to ensure we're transforming our own mindset and create that conducive environment.
Thank you very much. Any of the panelists would like to react to some of the points raised by your colleague before we go to the next question? Yep.
Yes, I just wanted
Chet?
to react to the Vice Chancellor of the University of Rwanda. And I think I agree with him when he's talking about equity in the African continent. I think it is very important that we understand the realities of people's life here, understand the realities of our governments, and understand that the impact of foreign policy on the African continent. This is something that we need to take into consideration when we are talking about science advice. So how do we move forward as a continent when we see that we do not learn from history, when we have a lot of evidence, but there are also historians that have, captured evidence throughout the years. But when we do not see any lesson learned from that, how do we move forward when we do not see social justice and when we do not have a definition of human rights nowadays? So all these questions have to be considered, I think, as a priority at the global level, so that we can, as the African continent, be more autonomous, and then we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yep.
I think conferences like INGSA are very important to bring, as you've already mentioned, all these conflicting interests and viewpoints on the table. And I think the first step really in creating or shaping inclusive policies is to be in contact and to stay in contact. May it be sometimes hard given geopolitical circumstances, but I think this is an important step towards it, to really acknowledge that there is inequality in the world in many ways, to get aware of it and to work together, at least on a common understanding on certain topics, and maybe in later phases to work on common principles. This is also the role within the International Science Council or within the GRC or in the Science Granting Council's initiative, where institutions from the Global North heavily interacting with institutions from the Global South in order really to, in many ways, not only talk on a political or more general way, but really to work hands-on on concrete questions that arose and really come further in this respect.
Thank you. Any other comments or reaction? Maybe I'll have one, and in a sense, Didas mentioned that a little bit, and the other kind of referred to it a little bit. The way we train the young generation to become scientists, the way our universities are organized. Are we just going to perpetuate what we do now? The funding organization as well. I could add probably funding organization into that mix. Do we need to reinvent university? Do we need to kill university? Start fresh? Maybe I'll ask Didas to start with, and then we for the other panelists as well.
Thank you. We are not going to reinvent universities, but at least we are learners as universities. Universities are also learning. And we always have to evolve in our approaches, in our ways of teaching, and in the way we empower our learners. Today, I even look at my university, how we used to approach our teaching, our empowerment of our learners in 10, 20 years back. It's not the same approach because even the environment dictates otherwise. And for example, yes, we know, and it is, as I said earlier, it is hard to really get through with it. If even today when we are talking about inclusivity and fairness and equity and so forth, still it goes back to there is this don't remember certain gentleman, George Orwell, in 1945, said, I think in English it is all men are equal, but there are those that are more equal than others. Tous les hommes sont égaux, mais il y en a ceux qui sont plus égaux que les autres. Is those that feel like they are, when it comes to funding, those who feel like they have the funding, they often want to impose how things should be going. Even at the university, they will try to direct you how, well, let me say, for example, if I'm giving you money, research funding, for example, I will set the conditions. Where are you directing your research to? What shall you be working on in your research endeavors? But if you can have that context, inclusiveness, and understand, open it, allow me to think, because as we said, science is not exclusive. It is science anyway. So even in our teaching, we are preparing our students, our learners, to always think like they are universal citizens, global citizens. They should be thinking broadly, independently, critically, to think critically and break those boundaries. But the way we were taught in so many years back, we could think, and this is the way to go. You have to learn how to become an employee, a good employee, and this is how. Today, even primary students, primary kids will be questioning why this, why or the other. So we are training. Our training approaches have completely changed. People are always wanting to feel that independency, to be free, independent thinkers. And I don't know, but they can only be fully independent when they are fully empowered, when they have resources to their disposal, and then they can direct their thinking as they wish. Otherwise, as we continue to really keep dependent, they will always keep directed on how to do. And exclusivity will perpetuate itself instead of, I don't know whether I'm getting too philosophical, but think of a situation in schools when funding comes from one direction, and then of course that direction will be directing you to where you go. But if, for example, we are empowered, my university is a government-owned university, and have enough funding to think independent as a university, I will be able to even empower my students to carry out research that they want. Otherwise, but anyway, we are not reinventing universities, but we are trying to adapt our approaches to the the current situations, directed by several others, including technology and all others. Thank you.
Other comment? F.
So, yeah, my take on this is coloured by a career. I've mainly worked in governments and in politics, and only relatively recently in a university. And I've always loved the slogan of the Royal Society, founded almost 400 years ago in Britain, whose slogan then was nullius in verba, which means don't believe anything anyone says, basically. That skepticism is the foundation of science, and we need to be skeptical of most things. In relation to universities, there has been a vast expansion of universities around the world in the last 20 years, but incredible isomorphism. They nearly all have the same disciplines, same lecture halls, same length of degrees, same titles, and so on, which might be good, but we don't know. And it's only very recently evidence centres have been created for higher education to even assess whether these are the optimum means of training the next generation or doing research. So there's a very big issue, which you've opened up, Remy. But I want to just focus on one part of it, closer to INGSA territory. And this is a thing which again has struck me perhaps because of my mixed background. In the past, the idea was you had scientists who advised and politicians who decided. And there was this, and we build up a very rich network of science advice to feed into governments. It crystallized for me in the spring of 2020 when I realized in my country there was very sophisticated science advice going into government, and it was somehow assumed that in Boris Johnson's brain, all of this would be synthesized into highly sophisticated actions. And it was obvious that was a ridiculous premise. And this is becoming true of so many issues as more and more of government has a high science quotient. We have to, I think, change the model. We have to have more hybrid decision-making institutions where the scientists are sharing in the responsibility for making decisions and being held to account for them. And it was very clear then, I did a study of governments around the world, none could articulate what its synthesis method was. How, when it had advice coming in on epidemiology, and mental health, and economics, and education, how do you synthesize them? No one could give a coherent answer. So we need a series of new methods and new skills, and this relates to universities, because obviously universities need to be training the next generation of scientists and engineers to be able to think more holistically, to understand ethics, to understand history, to understand the kinds of multidimensional issues which are thrown up by AI or synthetic biology or pretty much everything else. We need our universities also to play a part in retraining officials. Around the world, most officials are still primarily trained in law and economics and only have a rather dim understanding of data, statistics, science, and politicians even less. Most countries have zero academies, zero training for politicians. And if you don't believe me, I used to do a little test for both politicians and officials. I'd ask them, you use the internet, maybe 4, maybe 6, maybe 8 hours a day. Can you give a 3-minute lecture to a secondary school on how it works? Almost none of them could. It's magic for them. And if you ask them, how does ChatGPT work, they'll be even less likely to answer. So we have this massive capability gap as science and technology accelerate in incredibly exciting ways. And yet many of the key decision-making groups simply don't have the capabilities, the skills, the background to understand how to govern them. So I think universities have to actually experiment, they have to innovate, they have to attempt new methods of teaching, and we can go down, there's lots to talk about there. But they also need to address not just the 18 to 21 or 25-year-olds, they also need to help a rather older cohort of people exercising power actually to understand how they should be using that power to address the huge transitions of the next 5, 10, 15 years, most of which are systemic, most of which are multidimensional, most of which are complex, and yet we have education systems still stuck, even more than governments, in very anachronistic silos.
A big challenge, and INGSA should have a role there. Maybe I'll go, at the end. Sandra?
Maybe just a short remark how funders can contribute to support universities in developing their training when it comes to matters of equality or inequality. So we always have to be very sensitive with regard to the academic freedom. But we have one example concerning good scientific practice. So we have a code of conduct for safeguarding good scientific practice. And it's a prerequisite for funding that all the institutions that get funded have to really adopt all the principles in their own law, in their own statutes. And there are many principles about creating inclusive work environments, about unbiased training of the people, and also to take care that in international cooperation, the cooperation is on equal footing. So it's part of good scientific practice if you work with colleagues from other parts of the world, that you not just jump out of the helicopter, like it was said at the World Conference for Research Integrity 2 years ago in South Africa. They called it helicopter research. It's a nice expression. but really to work with the colleagues from the other countries on equal footing, from designing the research question up to analyzing the data that was gathered with their specific knowledge. And this is what we really have at the core of our research funding, as it's really an important part. And this is in the curricula of the universities, and have to train it very early on to their students. And this is one way we can contribute to a little bit changing also the training in the universities.
So some change at the level of research funders as well are critically important.
Yeah, like the ALEA code, it's quite comparable.
Jen?
Yeah, I just wanted to reply to question about do we revisit our universities. So teaching and learning, they do happen in a context and in a time. And we are limited. For example, what is the purpose of a university? So we are limited. We are profit making. So we have to address some very important and realistic issues. And we have also to ask ourselves, how free are our universities today to import important critical knowledge to our students? And how free are our students at the university to conduct their own research? What about our academic freedom in difficult times? And we can see, for example, around the world, students protesting, but universities might react differently, might not take into consideration what is happening. So what is the role and the purpose of a university nowadays? And this is something that we also have to look into. And what is their role in science advice to the government if their own academic staff or students are not in agreement with themselves?
Good point, and I think here the Global South can help. We have different views, probably. Lise, do you want to add something here?
Yes, I just want to add that I think a lot of universities are dealing with transformation, curriculum transformation, for instance. And yes, it is a very slow process. It takes us at least 3 years to change a specific degree. And we do know we need to change the content, and we need to change the types of degrees we offer, that we are covering more a transdisciplinary approach. Yet we need to lay this strong foundation first and foremost. So we cannot really migrate away from that old-fashioned system of chemistry, physics, maths 1 in first year. But what we can do is we can add, for instance, leadership training, AI training, compulsory for all students in all disciplines, so that we acquire a common language, a common understanding, and a common vision to use the future tools that we will get. And whether you're in the law faculty or health faculty, AI will become the tool to use in the future. And I'm talking about language models, all the different knowledge packages that students need. So we can incorporate it in a first year level, but we need to get students to focus. And it's only at that postdoctoral level where we really start pushing them into transdisciplinary programs. And I think that's perhaps the point where we are still struggling, how to adapt quickly in a transformed world.
Maybe a last couple of comments, Jeff, and maybe Didas wanted to comment as well?
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to agree with all my colleagues in this panel, but, well, the university today, like it or not, has to reshape itself to the current realities, and I do agree. Today, you cannot stand out to say you are studying mathematics and you want to qualify as a mathematician, and you will close yourself out away from all other disciplines, because you cannot live in today's context if you can. You want to live like in the past. So even in research today, I think it is not particular with the University of Rwanda, but it is all over. We encourage, if you have to apply for funding, for example, research funding, submitting your proposal, there is that interdisciplinarity. You have to prove it. It's also inclusiveness. You have to be well aware of what is happening. For example, the disciplines, the programs we were offering like in 10 years ago are no longer the same that we are offering today. We have to all adapt them to the current realities, and we have to make sure that at entry, as we come to the university, we introduce you to these, we call them today the soft skills, and AI, computer skills, and talking the computer language, financial literacy, and whether you are studying physics or you are studying law, or you have to get those other tools, those languages, to enable you to survive outside. If you are university to be relevant today, you have to be knowing what is happening outside, connecting to the world, and that's how you will be able to give that science advisory, because you know you are connected to the government, the situation outside, and then your advisory, your science advisory is not going to be the academic. It will be reality. You are responding to real issues, and they will find relevancy in you as a university advisor, science advisor. Thank you.
So, Jeff, last comment on this point.
Yeah, so I don't think every university has to be the same. And I'm very influenced on this question by work about 10 years ago with someone, some of you may know, called Chen Jining. He was then president of Tsinghua University. He's now party secretary of Shanghai in the Chinese Politburo, and probably the most senior scientist, the most powerful scientist in a government anywhere in the world. And he was then trying to make China's top university create a very different model, which was a challenge-driven model, starting not with the disciplines, but with live unsolved problems, either in science or in the city of Beijing, social problems, getting students to work on a project basis, to work in teams, to work in a multidisciplinary way, to collaborate with society and the municipality and so on. It was a completely different mentality of what a university education should be. There are parallels in some universities like Northeastern in the US and Arizona State, and there's now a network in Europe of challenge-driven universities. I don't think this is the only model, but I think any university system which isn't doing some work to almost flip on its head the traditional disciplinary model and instead start with problems, start with questions, start with challenges, and then work backwards to mobilize knowledge to solve them. If you're not doing that at all, I think universities will struggle to be relevant and actually to be useful and respected.
True. Yep, thank you. Good discussion. I'm sure it could continue for probably many hours. We'll not find a solution easily. Next question, time is running. We talk a lot about science, policy. 10 years ago when INGSA was created, a lot of work on that, the link between science, policymaker, government. Now it seems that we are trying, maybe it's far from perfect, to integrate kind of a third partner, to have that a triangle, and the third partner will be society interface. So how does that change our job as a university president, as funders, as a scientist, science advisor? What's the impact of focusing more and more on society, making sure that's not just a word, but it's real, and there's an action plan behind that? Who would like to answer that, or try to answer that first?
Maybe,
I want to give it a try.
maybe I can go. It's all centering to university, but if I got the question right, is I think we are not going to introduce it now. Since time immemorial, the universities have three principal mandates. One is teaching, training. The other one is conducting research. And the third one, the most critical, relating to the question you put, is community engagement. Like, what you've taught, you've researched, then how do you relate what you've been doing to societal needs? I think it's simply to enhance it, to enhance how close we get to, with our communities, with our societies, and how more relevant we get with our communities than keeping ourselves as ivory towers, as they used to refer to universities, getting closer and learning about the issues the society is facing and trying to find solutions to those issues and avoiding getting as traditional as people we are discussing. And then, as I said earlier, making yourselves at the universities more relevant and whoever has an issue, and that's how we are always encouraged to connect with the private sector, the civil societies, the governments. That's how they will find relevance in us, by getting closer to them and responding to the needs. By fulfilling that last mandate, that's a requirement of community engagement, taking what we've been training, what we've been researching about, and bringing it closer to the community, or even the community getting to us to see as to whether we can respond to their own needs. And I think that is the way I can respond to the question. Thank you.
Okay, and maybe I ask here, Sonja, as a funders, but the triangle, again, the policy as well in there.
So I would say in general, it was one of the missing pillars, the society. So therefore, I really are in favor of you integrating it into the overall picture. Because society is of great importance in generating knowledge, and as referred right in the morning, yesterday's morning, also has a crucial role in transferring the scientific knowledge into their everyday life. The very instructing example of washing the coffee, that was very striking, and has potential really to shape or make people's life take a different direction. And society is a recipient of complex and vast amounts of often false information, but also very complex and hard to grasp information. So therefore, we also have the society in our mind, but as a funder for research funding, for basic research funding, the involvement of citizens is not a mission per se for the German Research Foundation. So we fund the involvement of citizens when it is scientifically based within the projects, but not as an aim on its own per se.
Good, thank you. Jeff, with your expertise and working in different world.
Yeah, I think this is really important and quite difficult, to say the least. I've just completed a few weeks ago a project for the European Commission on whole of government innovation. And we were working with national governments on how to actually get all the different departments and ministries and agencies roughly aligned on things like net zero. And in almost every country this question came up. Shouldn't we be talking about whole of society innovation, not whole of government? And yep, fine. So what do you actually do? And here you discover that, of course, there have been very close links between science and engineering and governments for 2,000-3,000 years, mainly on infrastructures or irrigation or weapons and so on. But society has generally been an observer. I think this is beginning to shift in some really exciting ways. Most of the global institutions of the last few decades have tried to bring in civil society, IPCC, and the COPs, obviously. It bears on biodiversity, less so as yet on the internet and AI, but that's become a norm. Within nations, many have experimented with ways of, again, involving the public. Denmark had consensus conferences, I think for 30 years, of randomly selected members of the public to advise on things like bioethics. There are citizens' assemblies. France has recently still got one on end of life. Again, trying to experiment with ways of bringing society into the discussion. I think research funding agencies should be involved in this and actually involving their public, whose money it is that's being spent, in guiding on priorities. A few years ago, I commissioned a survey for the UK on what the public would have prioritized, and it was quite different from what the elite and the research funding agencies prioritize, but at that point we couldn't get the ministers interested in this. And I think it's a multi-level thing. The fact that some cities are now appointing chief science advisors, like Amsterdam and a number of others, I think is really important, because it's often easier for society to engage at more local levels than at the national level. But maybe this is a great topic for INGSA to really look at what is the menu of options, what do we know about which ones work and which ones don't, and how could we make the work of science a bit more genuinely inclusive and democratic in the future. And of course, some part of that has to encompass social innovation, grassroots, bottom-up, creativity, ideas, problem solving, and integrating that with the more formal world of evidence and so disciplinary science.
Very good. Naturally, INGSA is already kind of there in terms of trying to build capacity science advice at the local level. That's one of the chapters that we're trying to develop at the moment. So I'm with you with that for sure. A comment from Lise and Shannon on that?
Yes. I was just thinking of the old-fashioned vocational training, and we often get students from Europe who have to come and do a 3-month study in one of our universities, for instance, to gain experience and to broaden their whole view of the world and challenges and problems. And I thought the model works very well. What is also interesting is that we, for instance, have a compulsory 1-year community service by, for instance, medical doctors. After your formal degree, before you can start practicing, you have to go and work in a community hospital. And I think that's valuable models that's taking science to the community and to the society. There's also another interesting model, and that's citizen science. We for instance, will use, for instance, cell phones to get the community to help monitor insect pests, for instance. And then suddenly you awaken that the scientist in every human being and that the whole society and community. And I think these examples is really challenging young scientists to think. I mean, these innovation incubators are essential for generating the next science leaders.
Very good. Shannon.
So, in Mauritius, at my previous work, Higher Education Commission, so we draw a list of priority fields of studies, by surveying industry, employers, and then we come up with this list, and then university would follow this list. We also look at what is happening internationally, because as a small island state, we cannot lag behind, and we need to work and evolve in the global context. But we do not survey civil societies, we do not survey citizens, because I'm not sure whether we have a structure for that, and whether we feel that there is a need to query the citizen about what they want to study at the universities, what they feel would be something that we, in Mauritius, we should be focusing on for the good of our own citizen, beyond, for example, doing data science, AI, IT, these types of fields that are, I would say, fashionable, or that are in need by the industry, because they need employees, and workers for their own institution. So there are these missing puzzles, and I think in everything that we undertake, we need to now have the voice of the citizens on board, because it might lead us to, unexpected outcomes, like innovative fields of studies that we might introduce and that would be adapted and relevant to our own island. So
that's kind of the part of the transformation imperative. Maybe you have time for a couple of questions. Yep, so in the back there, if there is a mic. And then I ask each panelist maybe for a 1-minute type of closing remark on their part.
Thank you, Kirion, Remy, for the opportunity, and also the panelists. First, quick one to the Vice Chancellor, University of Rwanda. You seem to have stopped at education 3.0, 1.0 being teaching, 2.0 being research, 3.0 being community engagement. What do you think about 4.0 innovation and 5.0 productive, industrious, and entrepreneurial universities? So we go through the whole evolution. And secondly, targeting Professor of Collective Intelligence, Geoff Morgan, University College London, and maybe others also could chime in. I am a government, a senior official, policy maker in science, technology, and innovation. Suppose that we're faced with a challenge and we need scientific or science advice. And we have three scenarios. The first one being that randomly we pick mixed view scientists, to get their, positive agitation amongst them, to generate some, advice from them randomly without any peer reviews, But, second situation where we have all the eminent scientists publish, and from their publications which have been peer reviewed, appearing in databases like Scopus Index, we distill policy briefs, or they do it, and they show us. So this is what, pay the challenge, this is the way. And lastly, we pull all the millions of papers, peer-reviewed papers, plunge them into AI tools, and generate, on a specific challenge, what do you think would be your advice? And the AI generates, what could be considered to be inclusive, what would be considered to be collective intelligence, what should the government rely as a reliable source? So, yeah, thank you.
So, difficult question, but short answer. Jeff, we start with you.
Thank you. That's a fantastic question. And we are trying to do experiments to almost answer questions like that. And my answer is often the best will be a hybrid. So the AI tools, generative AI, is every month becoming dramatically better for doing a first cut of pooling evidence, especially in a crisis, and giving you some kind of synthesis. You then, secondly, though, need a AI-enhanced version of one of your options, and we're working on a version of that which can look at published research and show what might be most relevant to your particular context. If you're interested, I can share some of this. But there then has to be a human deliberation about it, and ideally that's reasonably open. It's not dominated by overly eminent figures from just a few disciplines, which has often been the problem in countries like Britain, to judge what the best answers are. And as you point out in your question, these tools are dramatically different from even 5 years ago. And I think it will be absolutely common sense in the later part of this decade that any kind of science advice process has to be very intensely mobilizing collective intelligence, both within the academy and more broadly, and making the most of wherever AI is then to distill, synthesize, and also assess the relevance and quality of the different bits of input. So thank you for a fantastic question.
So Didas, you are 5.0.
Thank you so much. It was such a good question because when I was responding, talking about the principal mandates, teaching, research, and community engagement, I did not mention the fourth one, which is actually today not particular to any university. I think across the world, innovation is something. This is going to be, we've been talking about science being the common language, the universal language, but also innovation. This is, for example, the University of Rwanda, which is a comprehensive university with all, all disciplines, if I may say it so. Innovation cuts across. On each, we have 6 colleges. The University of Rwanda having 13 campuses distributed across the country. On each and every campus, irrespective of which discipline that is offered at that campus, there is an innovation hub. And that innovation hub is accessible to whichever student from whichever campus. You simply have access to that innovation hub. And you have people expert to support you. And what is interesting in this innovation is that it is transcending your original discipline. Like if you enrolled for law, you are free to go to the innovation hub and go into a project in agriculture. Innovation, your innovations. We have examples last 2 weeks ago where I was visiting one of the innovation hubs, and I found a student in chemistry is having an innovation project in music. And that's the good thing with innovation. It is limitless. You are free to innovate. There are people to support you as a learner. You come with your ideas. They help you to shape it and give it a better kind of, but they allow you to continue with your idea, put in better kind of shape. And this is, they are competing. Students, they're enjoying it, and because it does not limit them to their specific discipline they enrolled for. They are free to think broader and get support in that. So we have the fourth 4.1 or 4.1, as we refer to it. Innovation is key to all, and it is across all disciplines. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe a short comment, 1 minute max from each and every one of you. We'll start with Sandra.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we've talked about a lot about the transformative imperative throughout this conference. And what referred from this many contributions is that we really have to accept that when we work together jointly on this complex and rapidly evolving global challenges, that they only can be tackled if we all are prepared to constantly work together to mutual learning what the individual stakeholders bring in. So society, may it be the researchers, may it be the funding organizations or other organizations, and that we all get used to very agile and context-specific participatory approaches. So it's not a project that can be terminated. So I'm ready now. I've published a statement on how to use AI in funding proposals. It's also holds true for sustainability. It's a constant process we have to work on. We all learn together, and this would be my final statement. Thanks.
Thank you. Sharon?
Yes. So I would like to say that at INGSA Africa, we aim to train the scientists in the African continent to on science advice skills, and we have a program that is the science skills development program. So we have our third cohort that is coming up now, and we have launched the call for mentors and mentees. So this program is about mentoring. It is a very human-centered program where we mentor young and mid-career scientists, and our mentors are volunteers. So I will launch this call, and I also call on mentors to join us to provide training on science advice skills development. We need both female and male mentors, and we have 2 cohorts that have come out, and we are trying to improve on this program, and we have a lot of other activities that we are carrying out, and I really want to call out to people to join us to make these programs successful.
Thank you. Yeah.
So a final comment from me on Africa and the transformation imperative, which I think is still up there. So a few years ago, my daughter decided to do her last 2 years of secondary schooling in Africa, in Eswatini. And I was a little bit skeptical of that, but it turned out to be a brilliant choice on her part, and it's made me quite biased in favor of what is possible in this continent. We've observed Africa jumping ahead of the global north in all sorts of fields, from mobile money to mobile health. And I was involved in various UNDP projects using collective intelligence and AI in this continent, which we couldn't do in Europe because the organizations were too stagnant. So I guess my encouragement to you is, please benefit from, adopt, adapt models of science advice, etc., from elsewhere, but be ambitious and transcend them so that we can then copy you.
Great comment. Yes.
Thank you. I want to talk about 2 things as we conclude. One is, how do we our research? And from academic point of view, there was a time when we were only focusing on how many publications I've come up with for my promotions into the academic ranks. But today we focus more on how impactful your research is, how does it respond to societal needs. But 2, the other thing I want to talk about is what is interesting. You said you are working on for the next INGSA conference about society science advice. And I think in Rwanda here we have a lot to share. The issues we had in Rwanda, or we have, are mostly responded to, especially, and I don't want to say scientists are not advising, but society is advising us on what works best. You've heard about Gacaca and how to respond to our biggest challenge in Rwanda. Some of you have heard about what we call Abunzi, and how they have really supported the systems in Rwanda. And those are all society-generated ideas. And you've heard about the community health workers. We call them, well, I'm now using the English one and I'm forgetting the Kinyarwanda word. These are people who are doing lots of medical support from just village levels. And those are all society-generated advices to government. And they have worked very well. And I've just mentioned 3 of them, but there are several of them that come from society, and they respond to big issues in supporting the government endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Yes, I want to touch on what is so exciting. And I want to focus on AI and healthcare. So it was interesting recently, a discussion we've had was that traditional healthcare was actually not healthcare, it was more sick care. Hospitals are full of sick people. And we should really flip that coin, and we can now, and we've seen successful examples. So it's really about shifting that hospitals of sick people to platforms of healthy populations. And if we look at some of the AI tools, and most of you may have some of these watches where they're continuously monitoring your blood pressure, and et cetera, and all of that information going into central databases and getting profiles for populations and focusing on addressing those emerging needs in a population, such as maybe diabetes, et cetera. And that shift, to me, is a significant reflection of the transformation we have been able to do in a major field of science. And I really think it is the golden moment of opportunities. I think scientists have arrived, and I think Africa, most importantly, reflect to me hope, youth, energy, and a desire to excel, exceed, and lead. And with that, I want to say Rwanda, to me, is really the gem in Africa, and it's been a wonderful conference. And I want to just personally say thank you to the hosts and the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panelists. Now we'll move on to last little bit of the program. So maybe if you prefer to sit down in your chair in the audience, just move there, yeah. After that we have to set up for the photo. Thank you very much, and I think as a key word from that session for me was be ambitious. It was related to the continent here, to Africa, and I say be ambitious globally, and I'm sure that Africa can be a leader, a world leader. You have a very young population, and that's the resources that's probably more important than any others. I will not be long. I think, yeah, so we have the slide here, and I'd like to ask Indigo Strodwijk, if I don't know if I see the name right. Is she here? Okay, just come up front. So we want to thank you very much for your artistic talent, and also to be able to summarize days of discussion in a slide. When I saw that this morning, I was amazed by what you did yesterday and now what you have done today. So if you agree with that, maybe we could send it to everyone. So all participants send copy of that, and maybe one day you'll see T-shirt. People with T-shirt on that. So thank you very much again. So I mentioned a few times we small team at INGSA, but very, very engaged. So each and every one of them worked very hard for that, to organize the meeting here. Maybe a bit of a round of applause for them. But as important, your engagement. So over the past few days, I've been amazed by the level of interest, level of participation, the discussion, the energy in the room. It was very, very stimulating for all of us, the small team, saying, we have done a few things right. But thanks to you and your participation, really engaged, and we will continue to count on you as a key partner, key members of the INGSA family. Some key words, and we heard them as well during the last panel, but trust was mentioned many times. Trust, of course, if we think of the triangle again, science, policy, and society, trust is absolutely key, absolutely essential, and it's not necessarily easy. It takes time to earn it, and you can lose it very, very quickly. So we have all to make sure that we keep the trust of the various partners everywhere on the planet. Another key words, more and more activities, South-South type of collaboration and partnership. So we talk about that quite a bit in the various sessions and satellites. Your commitment to the organization, and that was a kind of signal to me. Many of you came and asked when and where will the next meeting be. Maybe one thing that I can answer probably for sure, 3 years. At the beginning we had said, well, every 2 years we'll have a meeting. It's quite a bit of work to do that, and also to have time for you to reflect on this meeting. Probably need a bit of time to put in place a structure to improve on what we are doing, and for that I certainly personally count a lot on our chapter and associated organization. So I certainly will get back to the leader of the chapter, and they are the key person on the ground in the various regions of the world. Where? Well, maybe if you have suggestion, proposal to us, send that over the next little while, and then probably discussing with the board of INGSA will come up with some kind of decision. I will mention here my bias. I think we had the first meeting in the Global South, in Africa. I think the next one still should be in the Global South, but I will have only one vote. So we welcome a proposal. My last don't forget in a minute we'll have a photo, but the last comment before to that, there is still business to do, and tomorrow afternoon at the University of Rwanda, we'll have a public lecture. And I see Bernard is there, Bernard Voyer from Montreal, and Bernard had traveled the world, the Arctic, the Antarctic, the Everest, anything that you could climb, and ski on it. He has done it, so I'm sure it'll be, in terms of exploring planet Earth, Bernard will be able to tell us a lot about what he did. And I don't know if Kevin is still, you're back. So Kevin, of course, we'll talk about it, and talk about a little bit about that in one of the sessions today, but the universe, exploring the universe. So that would be planet Earth and then the universe. And I think the beauty of these two talks will be the fun and the excitement of doing science, and hopefully science advice.